Here, we believe in the well-being of all of our students, our faculty, and staff. We consider SPC to be a community of care. For this reason, we created Project HEAL. And you'll hear a lot more about Project HEAL and the purpose of the initiative. Through this program, our faculty and staff are developing preventive plans and strengthening partnerships with community behavioral health providers. And by educating the college community, we can help our students and each other in finding resources for assistance in mental health and substance abuse challenges. These challenges have continued for so long, for so many, due to outdated societal stigma. You know, it's not popular to say that you need help, but it's important that you feel comfortable to do so. The courage and commitment to make the change will be well illustrated by our illustrious speakers tonight. Tonight's program is presented by the college's Institute for Strategic Policy Solutions, and we are pleased to have as one of its board members, Pinellas County Commissioner Kathleen Peters. Commissioner Peters knows our nonprofit and business community well. Having worked with the Clearwater Chamber of Commerce, the YMCA of Greater St. Petersburg, and the Juvenile Welfare Board. Prior to becoming the county commissioner, she served as state representative for the Florida House of Representatives for 6 years. The biography in your program illustrates the depth of knowledge and expertise and passion she has for tonight's topic. The importance of increased accessibility to mental health and substance abuse support, and the reform of the systems that have prevented so many from receiving the resources they need. Multiple organizations have presented her with achievement awards in recognition of her efforts to bring about change here locally through her work in Tallahassee. And who better to lead this conversation tonight? It is my pleasure to introduce our moderator for this evening, Pinellas County Commissioner Kathleen Peters.
Thank you, Dr. Williams. It's such a privilege to be here. And thank you all of you for coming out. I believe it is a really, mental health and addiction to me is the biggest crisis not only in Pinellas County, but the state of Florida and the United States. So this is really close to my heart. It's something I've been working on for many, many years. And so it's a privilege to be here. I've been blessed to be a board member of the Institute for Public Policy for the college, and I was really excited when they asked me to moderate this event. So we're lucky enough to have some of the most amazing people on this panel. Before I get started, I want to let you know, if you haven't gone around the corner to the gallery, there's some information back there. Every one of you hopefully will get one of these books when you leave. I think it's a really great tool to help you understand mental health or mental illness and resources in the community in which you can go to get help. But there's plenty of other programs out there, Operation PAR, 211, NAMI, they got lots of gifts for you, and information. And so if you or a loved one have any kind of if you suspect mental illness or addiction, they can help you navigate this system so you can get help. So without further ado, I want to thank you, first off, for some of the questions. Some of you have already submitted questions for us to ask after we do our presentations, and we'll be going through that conversation. And we're really looking for dialogue. But before we get started on that dialogue, I'm going to introduce you to one of my favorite people, Judge Stephen Leifman. I got the privilege to meet him when I was in the House of Representatives. And I was working on mental health issues, and he came to me and asked me if I could help him pass some legislation, some policies that would stop the criminalization of people with a mental illness and really facilitate them getting help. And so his bio is in the program, and for those of you that are streaming and watching on the internet, if you go to the the Institute for Strategic Policy Solutions website. You can read his bio. He's an amazing man, and he has done so much to change the world and the policies and the laws that have to do with people with mental illness, to stop the criminalization and to ensure that we have solutions and strategies to help people with an illness. And it's such a privilege for me to introduce my good friend, Judge Stephen Leifman.
Good evening. It's really a pleasure to be here this evening, and I want to thank all of you for your interest in this topic, and I want to particularly thank Commissioner Peters for the remarkable work that she did while she was in the legislature. Not only was she a great advocate for many of these issues, she was actually a very effective advocate of these issues and helped us pass some of the most important legislation that's actually going on in helping lead the nation and where Florida is. And it's hard to do when the state puts so few dollars into this issue, but at least we have been able to come up with some better policies that are putting us in the right direction. I also want to say hi to my good friend Martha Lenderman, who is one of the true experts in the Baker Act in Florida and has helped our Supreme Court task force in past years. So great to see you, Martha, and all of you. Thank you again for being here and for your interest. I will tell you that what you learn on the bench after several years is that in many ways the criminal justice system is the repository of many failed public policies. And there is no greater failed public policy in America than our treatment towards people with mental illnesses. When I became a judge, I had no idea I was actually becoming the gatekeeper to the largest psychiatric facility in Florida. And sadly, that is the Miami-Dade County Jail. While the United States has 5% of the world's population, we have 25% of the world's inmates. Think about that a minute. As we sit here this evening, 1 out of 104 adults in the United States are behind bars. 1 out of 33 adults in the United States are under correctional supervision. Since 1980, the number of people going to jail in the United States has tripled, and their sentences have increased by 166%. And when you peel back that onion to figure what in the heck has happened, what you will find is that much of this is due to untreated mental illnesses and substance use disorders. In fact, people with mental illnesses in the United States are 10 times more likely to be incarcerated than hospitalized. They are 19 times more likely to find a bed in the criminal justice system than at any state civil hospital. Annually, we have almost 2 million people with serious mental illnesses arrested each year, and on any given day, we have about 400,000 people in the United States with serious mental illnesses behind bars, and another 800,000 under correctional supervision. 40% of all people with mental illnesses in this country at some point will come into contact with the criminal justice system. This is a shameful American tragedy, and it's one that must and can be reversed. And if you're not offended by the immorality of what we have done, you should be offended by the dollars we are spending on this problem. Last year, collectively in the United States, the counties spent $80 billion, that's with a B, on correctional costs. And our state spent an additional $71 billion on prison costs. I'm going to start with a short video that was produced by Michelle Gillen, former investigative reporter at our local CBS affiliate, that does a tremendous job capturing the horror of this situation.
Now, live, this is CBS 4 News at 11.
Life here is dirty, deplorable, dangerous. Tonight, CBS 4 takes you to a place cameras are rarely allowed to reveal what's happening in our downtown jail to the inmates on the forgotten floor.
The people who spend their days and nights in these jail cells all suffer from mental illness. They're accused criminals, not guilty in the eyes of the law, but forced to live in conditions you cannot imagine.
Our chief investigative reporter, Michelle Gillen, has been given unprecedented television access to reveal what's going on. Michelle joins us now, and I was shocked, to say the least, when I saw this.
I think certainly it is time for the public to see what is going on. The pictures you are about to see are indeed haunting and most disturbing. Hundreds of men with mental illnesses, many crammed into tiny cells. Some arrested for minor crimes that advocates say would have the average person out of jail in just hours. But incredibly, there is no place to send them. Tonight, our cameras take you inside a world rarely exposed, the forgotten floor.
And then they get thrown into a cell.
Prison insiders call this the forgotten floor, but it seems unimaginable that the horrendous, be it horrifying conditions of a jail spilling over with inmates suffering from mental illnesses could be erased from any sane man's mind. As frigid air is pumped into sealed cells, some beg for help for the barest of necessities, water. The faucets are dry. The water's not working.
The water's not working. He's drinking sewer water. He's drinking toilet water out of the toilet.
We'll get you water. It doesn't work, the faucets. The faucets aren't working. These stench-filled cells were designed for one person, outfitted with only a single steel shelf for a bed.
In this one, there's 3 inmates in a cell for one.
Yet 2, 3, sometimes even 5 men diagnosed with mental illnesses, in most cases arrested for low-level felony crimes, in some cases misdemeanors, are locked up for days, weeks, months. Tell me about you. Tell me, living in this, what do you want the public to know tonight?
I want the public to know that people in here, they're urinating on the floor, and we have to sleep on top of it. They're defecating on the floor, and you have to sleep on top of it. There's only one bunker that's made of steel.
And how many people are in your cell?
There is 4 in here right now.
They are only allowed out of their cell for 15 minutes 2 times a week.
30 minutes a week they're allowed out.
So other than a half an hour,
That's it.
this is it. They
Right.
are in this room.
Lights are on 24/7. The conditions you see just do not change.
I've been in Vietnam. I've been in Vietnam after 18 months of Vietnam. It's worse conditions in here. I wouldn't put a dog in here.
A chilling perspective from the jail's chief psychiatrist, Dr. Joseph Portier.
You would think that in 2006, we would treat people with chronic mental illness in a much better, more humane manner. But unfortunately, we're reverting back to how it was in the 16 and 1700s, which is terrible. It's morally incomprehensible.
A sentiment echoed by an outraged Miami-Dade County judge, Steve Leifman.
This is like a secret that people don't know about.
Yeah, it's a bad secret, and it's a sad secret.
What most of you don't know is that the Miami-Dade jail now serves as the largest psychiatric facility in the state of Florida. 3 of 9 floors, burgeoning with inmates suffering from mental illnesses, and according to Leifman, in desperate need of treatment. Not this type of confinement designed to punish people.
5 times as many people in our jail with mental illness than any psychiatric hospital in Florida. 5 times.
In this, right here.
Right here.
An elderly man emerges from the dirt and darkness.
There's one on the floor underneath the bunk and 1 or 2 standing around waiting for their turn to sleep.
And the crisis has unfolded across the state. In other Florida jails where they strive to comply with all the national standards for housing inmates, frustration over the virtual abandonment of mentally ill inmates left by the state to languish in jail cells for months runs deep. Colonel David Parrish.
Can you imagine the chaos that would result in the local criminal justice system if I stood at the booking door and said, sorry, we don't have any more room, we're not taking them from you, law enforcement?
Yeah. Parrish from Hillsborough County says local authorities had no choice but to sue the state of Florida to force the Department of Children and Families to comply with their legal mandate to transfer mentally ill inmates to a treatment facility within 15 days.
Jails should not be the de facto mental health facility for a county, but that's what they are in the United States.
You had your birthday here. How old were you?
I was 21.
21.
Yes, ma'am.
And you've been here 8 months.
Yes, ma'am.
In Pinellas County, the weight of incarcerating and caring for mentally ill inmates had everyone paying a price, an unacceptable one, according to Major Kirk Brunner.
We are not a treatment facility, and these people that you saw in Delta 1, the one that plucked his eye out, they need to be in a treatment facility, which is the responsibility of the state, not our responsibility.
And therein lies the danger. William Weaver Sr. was caring for his 40-year-old son Bill at home, a son he says suffered from schizophrenia but functioned well for decades until his medicine was changed. Then one night, according to police records, he attacked his elderly father, who called police and urged them to arrest his son, hoping this would trigger treatment.
Because he was under the false idea that if he got arrested, he'd get treatment.
Bill ended up locked up in a cell on floor 9 of the Miami-Dade pretrial detention center for several months. According to authorities, Bill jumped from this top bunk bed, cracking his skull and breaking his neck. He's now a quadriplegic who needs hospitalization to stay alive. We met up with his father, who had just left his hospital bed.
Do you think anything has come from what the incident of what your son went through?
Nothing. Nothing's changed. Do I think something could change? I don't know. I don't know. It's time. It's time. Something changed. But I don't know if it ever will.
Passed away a couple years ago as a result of his injuries, and we believe his father passed away not too far after that as a result of a broken heart. It took us 11 years, but we finally closed that horrible mental health jail and opened a more appropriate jail facility. But the answer is not building better jail facilities for people with mental illnesses, but building better systems of care so people don't end up in the criminal justice system. My journey into the mental health world actually began one morning when I was getting ready to go on the bench. I was approached by the assistant public defender and the assistant state attorney, and they asked me if I would speak to a couple whose son was in jail on a case I was about to hear. At the time, I was handling what we call a misdemeanor jail division. There's 3 kinds of people in a misdemeanor jail division. There are those with attached felonies who are not allowed out. There are those that are too poor and cannot afford to bond out. And then there are those with mental illnesses that just don't know how to get out. Because you see, these are people with very minor offenses that are still in custody, often quality of life offenses. So this lovely couple came into my chambers. They were very sophisticated. They looked like they were probably very well off, and they were horribly distraught. The mom was crying, the dad was shaking, and they literally began to beg me to get their son help. They told me that their son was brilliant. He had gone to Harvard. He had a late onset of schizophrenia, and he was now recycling through the criminal system, and they just didn't know what to do. This is in January of 2000. I was relatively new at the time, and I think when you're a new judge, you think you have a lot more power and a lot more wisdom than you really do. And I made the mistake of promising them that I would get their son help, because I was under this false impression as well that if you got arrested and you had a mental health disorder, there must be some kind of system of care in place, because I knew that if you got arrested and had a heart attack, we had a health care system in place, and the same, of course, must be true for people with mental illnesses. So I made the mistake of promising them that I would get their son help. So as I started to go back into the courtroom, the mom stopped me and she said, "Judge, there's one more thing I need to tell you about my son." She said, "Not only is he brilliant, but respectfully, he probably knows more about the mental health system than you do." I looked at her. I wasn't clear what she was trying to say, and I said, "Excuse me?" And she said, "Oh, you see, my son, he's the former head of psychiatry at Jackson Memorial Hospital. He was a Harvard-educated psychiatrist who had a late onset of schizophrenia, had religious ideations, didn't show up to work one day, cashed in his life insurance policy, got on a plane, flew to Israel to be closer to God, and within 3 weeks he was running around naked in the Orthodox sections of Jerusalem, so they deported him back to Miami, where he became homeless and started to recycle through our system." I had the same reaction as you did. I went in and I called his case. I don't remember the exact charge, but I think it was not even a statutory offense, but a local county ordinance like possession of a dairy cart that he was in jail on. A lot of homeless people get picked up on those types of charges. And so he stood and we started to have an amazing conversation. He was thoughtful, he was coherent, he was articulate, he was more respectful than the lawyers. I'm thinking, hey, maybe something's wrong with the folks. The guy seems fine to me. Except when you looked at him, he looked like a homeless man who hadn't bathed in months. He kept insisting there was absolutely nothing wrong with him. He did not have any type of mental health disorder, that if I would just release him, he would go see a psychiatrist, he'd get evaluated, he'd come back, but he said, and he was correct, that it was absolutely ridiculous to keep him on that charge in jail that long, because as he said, we had really dangerous people that needed to be in custody, and he was not one of them. And he was correct on all counts. And he had already been there for weeks. I said to him, can I ask you a question? He said, of course, Your Honor, anything. I said, I just don't understand one thing. You keep insisting there's absolutely nothing wrong with you. But if that's the case, why would a Harvard-educated psychiatrist be in jail, be homeless, and recycle through the criminal justice system? And all of a sudden, he got a look on his face of complete horror and fear. It's a look I can only describe to you that someone must have right before they think they're going to die. And then he started to shake back and forth, and he started to cup his ears. And he went into a full-blown psychotic episode, and he started to point to the back of the courtroom where his parents were. And he started screaming at the top of his lungs, and he started screaming everything in sixes. And he started yelling, Your Honor, Your Honor, Your Honor, you have to have that cup removed, you have to have that cup removed, you have to have that cup removed. And I said to him, aren't those your parents? No, 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 no. My real parents, died. Holocaust, Holocaust, Holocaust. And they're from the CIA, and they came to kill me, kill me, kill me, kill me. And the only thing that you could hear at that moment was his poor mother crying. Now, at the time, judges in Florida had absolutely no education about mental health, how to identify people with these illnesses, what to do with these cases. And the only thing I had been taught is that if someone acts, quote unquote, strange or bizarre, order a psychological evaluation. So I immediately order an evaluation. Comes back a few weeks later. He's now in jail. 6 weeks on possession of a dairy cart, and it says that not only is he incompetent to stand trial, but he actually meets Florida's very high criteria for involuntary commitment. I'm thinking, this is great. We're going to get this guy treated. We're going to live happily ever after. This is going to work out great. The parents are going to be so happy. At the time, he needed 3 evaluations to get the lawyers to agree on anything. I ordered 2 more. Now he's in jail, 8, 10, 12 weeks on possession of a dairy cart. We're spending tens of thousands of dollars on evaluations. All 3 evaluations, they come back and they say the exact same thing. I'm like, this is great. So I hand the evaluations to the lawyers. They agree or stipulate that he is incompetent to stand trial, and I begin to order him into involuntary commitment. And I look down and I notice that the assistant public defender has a grin on her face. Now, I will tell you, as a former assistant public defender, it's a really bad sign. And then she utters those magic words. If you're not a lawyer, you may not appreciate that. She says to me, Your Honor, in all due respect. You see, when a lawyer says that to a judge, trust me, it has nothing to do with respect. That's how they call us idiots when we don't know what we're doing. And I said, excuse me, and she whips out this Florida Supreme Court opinion that had come out a month or 2 before, and it said that county court judges had absolutely no authority to involuntarily commit anybody, and that my only option was to release him back to the street, have him go see a doctor, exactly what he had told me to do 10, 12 weeks earlier. And at the end of the case, it says, we don't really like this opinion, and we strongly urge the Florida legislature to address this issue. That was in November of 1999. Ask me if it's been fixed yet. I will tell you no. We don't become professionals. We don't become judges to be part of that kind of problem. Not only did I not fulfill the promise I made to his parents, but I released a floridly psychotic man who was imminently dangerous to himself or others back to the street of Miami. Not only did I put him at risk, I put the community at risk. God forbid something happened to him or he did something to someone else, I probably put my job at risk, but I followed the law. And I went back to my chambers and I was very upset, and I got on the phone and I learned 3 very valuable lessons that morning. The first lesson I learned is that Miami-Dade truly had a very serious mental health issue. That we had about 197,000 adults and 55,000 children in our community with very serious mental illnesses, and only about 1% of my community was getting access to care. 35% of the inmates in our jail, that was about 1,500 inmates, were on antipsychotic medication. And believe it or not, we were spending $500,000 a day, that's $180 million annually, to warehouse people in this hellhole that you wouldn't let your dog stay in. And until recently, 3.5 of our 9 floors were mental health floors in our main jail. And because conditions are not conducive in my jail and any jail in the United States, people with these illnesses generally stayed 4 to 8 times longer than someone without a mental illness, at almost 7 times the cost. And even worse, I learned that because we had not trained our police on how to deal with these issues, we had 25 people die during an encounter with law enforcement because law enforcement had not been trained properly on how to handle these issues. That was the first lesson. I also learned that this was not just a local problem, but it turned out to be a state and national problem as well. And finally, the third lesson I learned is that our community mental health system, our crisis system, and laws are terribly under-resourced, are antiquated, they're fragmented, and do not always reflect modern science and research and best practices, and are in great need of reform. I will tell you, I've been doing this for almost 19 years now, and I've come to a very simple conclusion. If we treated people with primary health issues the way we treated people with mental illnesses, not only would there be a plethora of civil lawsuits, they would probably be indictments for gross negligence. I don't know why it's permissible to discharge people in the middle of the night, floridly psychotic, and then when they don't behave the way society would like them to, we punish them by arresting them when we've never offered them the level of services that they need. And the irony to this is that treatment works. People with mental illnesses are no more dangerous than the general population, and on medication they're much less dangerous than the general population. And recovery rates for people with these illnesses are actually better than for people with heart disease and diabetes. And sadly, they're much more likely to be victims of violent crimes by a wide, wide margin than perpetrators. The history of mental illness is pretty tortured. I don't have a lot of time, so I'm not going to go through it as I might otherwise, but suffice to say it's the perfect storm between deinstitutionalization, the war on drugs, the war on crime, major cuts to housing, sentencing guidelines, created this terrible, terrible situation where our jails became the primary place for people with mental illnesses again. It wasn't always this way, but it certainly is today. The impact is staggering. In 1955, we had about 560,000 people in state hospitals, which would equate to about 1.5 million if nothing changed, although I'm not advocating we go back to the state hospital system. But to put this in context, last year we had 1.5 million people arrested and 2 million incidents with serious mental illnesses. And today there are less than 32,000 hospital beds. So we never deinstitutionalized. What we did is we allowed for the transfer of responsibilities from these really horrible state hospitals back to the jails, and allowed people to recycle through these systems. And in many ways, it's this cruel irony because 200 years have now passed and jails have once again become the primary place for people with mental illnesses, which is what they were when the country was first founded. And if this wasn't disturbing enough, let's just talk about the fiscal impact in a minute. We did a local study. The University of South Florida, Florida Mental Health Institute, has this wonderful institution. And they have these blended data sets, and they can tell a community who the highest utilizers of criminal justice and mental health services are. And so we sent them the names of 3,300 people that had been arrested in Miami-Dade that we knew had a mental health disorder to see if we could narrow down the number of people so we could focus our limited resources on the people that were deep-ending the most. So I wait and wait. I finally get this letter back. I open it up, and on this piece of paper are the names of 97 people, primarily men, primarily diagnosed with schizoaffective schizophrenia type disorder, who over 5 years they were arrested 2,200 times. They spent 27,000 days in that horrible jail. They spent 13,000 days at a state-funded psychiatric facility. They cost taxpayers almost $14.7 million, and we got nothing for it. It's not that Florida doesn't spend money, we just spend it in all the wrong places. We would have been better off sending them to Harvard. They would have had housing, they would have had a shot at an education, they would have had counseling, they would have had treatment, and they would have done much better than what we ended up doing for them. And if this wasn't bad enough, just think about what the state of Florida does. We spend 22% of our entire adult mental health budget to restore competency for people charged with felonies, which is only about 2,500 people. 22% of our entire adult mental health budget, that's $135 million a year, so that we can get people to take a plea and then release them back to the street without any access to treatment. It's actually the definition of insanity, where we just keep doing the same thing again and again, and we expect a different outcome. And look at our prison numbers. While Florida's prison population has started to level off, its population with serious mental illness continues to grow. In fact, while the population over the last 12 years has grown by about 50%, the mental health population has grown by about 178%. It's growing so fast that if Florida doesn't start to curb what's happening, we'll need to build 10 new prisons over the next 10 years just for the mental health population. Well, it's a good thing you're sitting down, because the cost to build and operate 10 prisons in Florida for 10 years is over $2 billion. Now, maybe it would be okay if this population was committing these heinous offenses and should be in prison, but the average stay for someone in prison in Florida with a mental illness is only 2.5 to 4 years. They're committing low-level offenses. We have a point system. They get caught up in the points because of quality-of-life offenses, and they qualify for a prison sentence. So that's all the bad news. The good news is that there are some answers. And there's a national initiative called Stepping Up, and it's something that we started in Miami 19 years ago, before it was a national initiative. And because of this case, and because it was a window to what was everything wrong with our system, and I would say the best thing about being a judge is that when we invite people to meetings, they come, even if they don't want to be there. So in 2000, after this horrible situation, the first national meeting of its kind was actually in Miami, and we were very fortunate. We got one of their last grants, and they sent me 3 experts. And they really were tremendous. And what we did is we spent the first half day, and we had all the right people in the room that could actually make policy changes. And we mapped out on this first day how our criminal justice system intersected with our community mental health system. And what we found is that it did not, that we were embarrassingly dysfunctional. I remember vividly being in that room and all of us so-called sane, healthy people looking at each other saying, who's more sick? The poor person on the street with a serious mental illness, or us so-called policy people who have designed a system designed to fail? And one of the experts, it was from Seattle, and I learned what the true definition of an expert was that day. It's someone that lives 15 miles outside your jurisdiction. Because trust me, I'm sure you all have sat around, talked about this problem, you all have good solutions, but it doesn't seem to get where it needs to go. But you bring an expert in and they say you have this problem. I was like, oh my gosh, we really have a problem. And so he told us this amazing story. They took a group of people like you in this room, and they took them to a local park in Seattle. And they took their shoes and their purses, their wallets, and the IDs away from them. They said, tomorrow, and you have you have a very serious mental illness. You have schizophrenia. Tomorrow morning, you need to be in court at 9 o'clock. At 10:30, you need to go see your probation officer. At 1 o'clock, you need to go see your psychiatrist. And at 3 o'clock, you need to pick up your medication. Good luck. And so you think about it, we didn't design a system that's accessible for people that are sick. And so we decided we needed to do a 2-part approach. And if I were to do this again, I would want a 3-part approach. But the 2-part approach was, how do we reduce the number of people coming into our system with these mental illnesses? And once they come in and they penetrate our system, how do we identify them and get them out if they should be out? And so we looked around the country, and clearly to us, the best pre-arrest program was out of Memphis, Crisis Intervention Team Policing, this wonderful 40-hour training program that teaches law enforcement how to identify people with serious mental illnesses, how to de-escalate a situation, and where to take them as opposed to arresting them. Well, I'm in a big county, and I think the last thing they wanted was some civilian to tell them how to do their job. And so we started very slow. We started with 1 police department. We were aided by my state attorney, Kathy Fernandez-Rundle, who actually did a couple grand jury reports on this issue. And now we have the largest trained squad of CIT officers in the United States. I have over 7,200 police officers at all 36 of my departments trained, and they are amazing. Between 2010 through 2018, although there's an asterisk on 2018 because we collect data on every CIT call the two major departments make, which is Miami and Miami-Dade, and for some reason the city messed up their numbers. So I have 2010 through 2017, both departments, and 2018, just Miami-Dade. But just with that, over those 8 years, those two departments combined handled 91,427,000 mental health calls. More impressively, out of the 91,427,000 calls, they only made 152 arrests. Our jail audit plummeted. We went from a high of 118,000 arrests in Dade County when we got all the departments trained to 53,000 this year. We're closer to Pinellas and Hillsborough County than we are any large county in Florida. Our jail audit went from 7,300 to 4,000. We closed one of our 3 main jails, actually saving my county $12 million a year. It's been closed for almost 7 years now, in real savings. Police shootings almost stopped, because while race can play a role in shootings, I think PTSD plays even a larger role that we haven't talked about. And how do I know that? Because my CIT coordinator gets 150 calls a month from police officers for their own personal mental health disorder. There was a study last year that police officers get 6 to 9 times more cortisol a day than we do, and that's what causes post-traumatic stress disorder. When you're exposed, and I'll let the doctor talk about this more, but your pituitary gland sends a message to your adrenaline. The adrenaline releases a chemical called cortisol. It's your flight or fight mechanism, and when you can't escape it, you get overdosed with cortisol, and it permanently alters brain activity, and this is what causes PTSD. It's physiological. It's not an emotional response. It also explains why 92% of all the women in jail and prison in the United States with serious mental illnesses were sexually abused as children, and it usually happens at 6, 7, and 8-year-olds. 75% of men who are in jail and prison in the United States with serious mental illnesses also have very serious trauma histories. We train all of our 9/11 call takers, we train all of our chiefs and their majors, and we have roll call training, and it has changed the entire culture among our law enforcement. We also set up a post-arrest diversion program, so now we have all this new screening at the jail. We use these validated tools. If you've been identified as having a serious mental illness, within 3 days, if you're charged with a misdemeanor, we send you out to a crisis stabilization unit. We reset the case in 14 days. We bring you back. We do not rebook you. And if you agree to go into the program, we find you housing, medication, and case management. The recidivism rate among our misdemeanor population went from 72% to 20%. We expanded it to felonies. The felony program has saved the county 84 years of jail bed days so far. And so the last thing we're about to do is open a new facility, a one-stop shop facility, because we save the county so much money. They're actually reinvesting $42 million back to the community so we can build this one-stop shop facility to make sure the most acutely ill get the services they need. And I am convinced that once we open this new facility and we continue what we're doing, we'll finally accomplish what the Supreme Court asked us to do, which was to deinstitutionalize this population and help them get the services they need. Thank you very, very much.
Isn't he awesome? He's really made such a difference in the state of Florida. There just aren't words to express the success that he has had in really changing how people with mental illness are treated. One thing I want to say, for those of you that don't know, Pinellas County also has their officers trained in CIT. Significant amounts. I know April Lott is in here. She conducts a lot of those trainings, and all the agencies in the county are a part of training our police officers so that they know And it's really, really effective. Matter of fact, in the state of Florida, I'm the one that mandated that every police department in the state of Florida had to have officers trained in CIT, and it's really critical, one of the first steps to stop the criminalization. I have the privilege of having two other people in the room to talk about what's next, change. The gentleman who lost his son talked about something's got to change. And that's really what I want to talk about is what's next, what's in the future. And Miami is really kind of the lead in the state of Florida on how to make that change. And that's why it was really important to have Judge Leifman here to help talk about why it's important and why it must be done. So I also want to introduce Ruth Powers. Ruth is with Central Florida Behavioral Health Network, and Central Florida is what we call the managing entity. So the state of Florida determines how much mental health and addiction money we're going to send to every community. And what they do is they give that to the managing entity, and they write the contracts to the providers. But it's really up to them to work with the providers to ensure that there's some kind of coordinated system of care so that every single community has that access to care and some kind of coordinated system of care. So I'd like Ruth to talk about kind of what's going on in the county, and I'm only giving her a few minutes to do it because I really want to get into dialogue with question and answers, and I think a lot more information is going to come from your questions. So Ruth, if you want to talk about Pinellas County and what they're doing.
I hate to disappoint you. There's no song tonight, as they said in the introduction. No singing, no dancing. What I would like to say is hello and welcome, and thank you so much for coming and listening to folks talk about behavioral health. There are a couple of things that I think are really very important that we need to talk about tonight. And before I do that, I would really like to recognize some of the folks who are here who are a part of the behavioral health system of care. If you're a part of the behavioral health system of care, if you're one of our valuable providers, please stand up. Come on, you can do it. Here they are, guys. Also here with us are representatives of Pinellas County Pinellas County Human Services. So hello and welcome. I'd also like to recognize Martha Linderman. She's been here forever. She'll tell you right now that she's retired, but it's not true. She's one of the people who really helped to develop CIT and to bring it to Pinellas County and to help Pinellas County become one of the first to be a part of CIT training. So one of the reasons that I wanted to recognize everybody is because we can't do this alone. We have very qualified professionals who are working in the behavioral health community. They've been doing it for many, many years, and they know how to help people. I think one of the things that we forget is that reaching out is really important, and that many times, especially when behavioral health problems happen, it feels to the person as though it's hopeless. So it's really important to reach out. If you're in that spot and you really are beginning to feel that things are not okay, reach out, because there really are people who can help you. There are qualified and experienced people who work together every single day to make sure that folks get the help that they need. We hear an awful lot about how you can't get in and how difficult it is, and people really don't care. And I'm here to tell you that that's just not the truth. It's just not the truth. We work very hard in the system of care to make sure that every single person who needs help gets help. And there are lots and lots of folks around who work long hours to do that. Now, are we perfect? Absolutely not. Are there people who aren't getting help? Yes. Pinellas County right now has one of the highest suicide rates in the state. We also have one of the highest rates of opioid use and deaths by opioids. We've got a long way to go. Our society has forgotten how important connection is. We spend lots and lots of time with our face in screens and without our face looking at another face and making a connection. I think it's really important that as we begin to address these problems, we find ways to make connections with people. The other thing that we have to remember is that folks with behavioral health problems look like us. They don't just look like us, they are us. We're reminded of that every single day, those of us who work with folks with behavioral problems, with behavioral health problems. They're us, and they're more like us than they are different from us. And it's very important to say that out loud and to acknowledge that, because not doing that only adds to the stigma. It only adds to the difficulty that folks have in reaching out. The last thing that I want to say to you, and then I'm going to give my time back. The last thing that I want to say to you is treatment works. Regardless of what horror stories you hear, regardless of all the difficulties that folks have, treatment works. Chronic mental illness, chronic substance use is that. It's a chronic illness. Just like diabetes, just like heart disease, it's a chronic illness. But treatment works. Recovery happens. People with mental illness and with substance use disorders can and do function sometimes better than those who have not had treatment, than those who do not have behavioral health problems. Recovery happens. So please reach out and please make connections. Thank you.
And she's absolutely right. And I think in some of the dialogue, we'll talk about some of the things that Pinellas County has done, because they've been very innovative in dealing with our high utilizers. And I've got to tip my hats to the county commission prior to when I was on it. They've done some really innovative things, and they really have gotten all the providers in the county to collaborate together. And there's really been a shift and a change in the quality of care since that collaboration really started. So next I want to introduce Dr. East. And Dr. East has a program here at the college that I want her to talk about for our students and any student that attends St. Petersburg College at any of the campuses. And so I think it's really critically important to reach out to young people. We didn't really talk about the statistics, and that the average age that mental health, the signs and symptoms typically start is between age 14 and 25. So the college population is really one of the most important places in which we really need to have outreach and programs and services for people to understand and really to destigmatize, so the stigma doesn't prevent people from seeking treatment. So Dr. East, if you'd like to fill us in on your program, it would be wonderful.
Greetings, everyone, and thank you so much for choosing to be here this evening. It's a topic definitely of discussion that we need to have. I am a full-time faculty here at St. Petersburg College, but I am also the project director of mental health services college-wide. And that is something that I'm very proud to say, because historically, SPC, as well as other institutions, have not always embraced mental health in the ways in which that we should. So what we've come up with are several different categories or levels, as you may say, of mental health awareness for our campus. The first thing that we will be rolling out and working on feverishly is Titan's Care. Titan's Care is basically the overall umbrella that encompasses all of our mental health initiatives college-wide. Underneath Titan's Care, we're looking at substance abuse, anxiety, depression, eating disorders, suicide, as well as a multitude of issues, including our veterans, domestic violence, so forth and so on. It's important that we call these things by name, because oftentimes we like to hide it as life issues or social issues. And that's simply not what it is. We need to put a name on it, just like we do cancer, in order for us to bring awareness and light to the subject matter. Specifically, what we're focusing right now is our Project HEAL, which is a grant that we received from SAMHSA. Project HEAL's focus, and HEAL stands for Healthy Emotions and Lives, is purely on all of the manifestations that take place and cause suicide, suicidal ideations, thoughts, that also focuses on teaching and educating our students, faculty, and staff on how to be aware and recognizing signs and symptoms of our students and signs and symptoms within themselves. We also choose to focus on several different modalities of education, such as trainings, videos, but mainly involving our community partners in order to help us and aid us in facilitating these practices and these educational tutorials that we're going to be putting on for our students. Right now, we are just breaking the surface on this, but I am truly proud that our institution is taking this very seriously, and I'm truly proud that we now have a monthly calendar, themed calendar that every single campus follows, where we focus on a different subject of mental health awareness every single month. So September, we focused on suicide, of course, and October, we're now focusing on domestic violence.
Thank you so much, Dr. E. So, these are our panelists for this evening, and I promise you we have great expertise up on the stage. So I want to start with a couple questions before the audience, and I think we have a microphone out there when we move to the audience questions. But to each of you, why do you think we have such a mental health crisis today? I know, Judge, you mentioned a lot of things, and you kind of talked about the history. But why do you think that there aren't more people like yourself engaging in mental health discussions and seeking systemic strategies to address the problem?
In a wonderful way. 2 years ago, there was an initiative put together by the National Association of Counties, the Council of State Governments, and the American Psychiatric Association Foundation called Stepping Up. And over 450 counties, representing almost half the American population, have now passed resolutions. Are you a Stepping Up county?
I believe we are.
Okay.
Lourdes, are we a Stepping Up county?
If not, you need to be.
Are we a Stepping Up county?
Okay, great. And so what it does is it helps bring together all these different groups. And the problem is, it's not one party, one institution, or one individual that created this. This is a complex issue. And there's not one entity that's sort of responsible for bringing the whole thing together. And what the Stepping Up initiative is trying to do is to help counties replicate best practices that are going on around the country. We've also created an organization called the Judges Psychiatric Leadership Initiative. We have over 4,000 judges and psychiatrists working at this, and we've just started a new program where we're now training every Chief Justice in the United States about mental health and these issues and how to work within systems to improve the response. And so I think in 10 years we're going to look back and see that this was the beginning of a sea change, and hopefully we'll look back and just start to deal with these illnesses like any other illness. But I think it's moving really rapidly in the right direction. I'm actually very optimistic.
Great. Anybody else have a comment on that question?
I have a comment on that. May I comment? Okay, there you go. I'm going to speak from a cultural standpoint as being an African American female in my community, because I think that that has played a huge role in me being taught that, for instance, the church is the primary place that we go to share our news and our information. And as a private clinician, I see that very often with the individuals that walk in my door, that they don't always look like me. And so the first thing I think that we need to do is definitely hit some of our grassroots organizations that our populations normally gravitate to for those types of healing and uplifting messages, because those are the ones that we rely on specifically for that guidance. And so if they are there and individually delivering a message of understanding, acceptance, no stigma, okay, and also education, then it's likely to change the perception overall of different cultures.
I think that's a great suggestion. So all of you, when you go to church or temple, talk to the pastor or the rabbi and suggest that they kind of adopt that in their everyday communications and their sermons.
The American Psychiatric Foundation actually created a workbook for the church and synagogues to actually teach the clergy how to do a better job addressing these issues. So what you can do is you can Google the American Psychiatric Association Foundation and look for their clergy initiative and maybe help get that to your own church, and so they can get access to that better information. But the doctor also made a great point. I mean, treatment also has to be culturally sensitive. And if it's not, people aren't going to come. And so it's really important that as we start to improve access, we also improve the right access.
Thank you. And I'll tell you, it takes a village, so we all need your help. So this would be also to all of you, I suppose. So what can city government do with regard to local policies and programs to promote proper treatment of people affected with mental illness and keep them out of jail? Now, you've talked about CIT, you talked about your one-stop shop. Is there anything else that you can think of? And I know Miami-Dade has a plan that you're ready to move forward on, but what kind of things can local cities and counties do that can really make a difference?
I think the first thing that every community should do is they should hold a summit, and they should invite all the traditional and non-traditional stakeholders and government officials that can make policy changes and just map out the intersection between these systems to see where the gaps are. Because each community is different. What worked in Miami may not work in Pinellas, but things, you have maybe have more things that we don't have, and we may have things that you don't have. So the key is to first identify where those gaps are, and then develop a plan. Look, we joke we're a 19-year overnight success. It's taken a long time to get us to where we are, and it sounds great what we've done, and it is wonderful, but it's taken a long time. And so the way to start, though, is to first develop that mapping process and then identify the holes, and then work as a collaborative with the community and you know, figure out where you can save money and then redirect the dollars and stop all the siloing. And the other thing that I said, if I were to do it again, there would be a third part, and this is the other group that should have been at the table with us at the beginning, is we should have had the pediatricians and the school board at our first meeting. Every child in the United States should be screened for trauma. You can look at something called ACEs, it's the Adverse Childhood Experience Score. There's a direct correlation between a child with a high ACEs score and substance abuse and mental health issues. And so if we just did a better job screening, you know, my kid's in public school, he couldn't start elementary school without a physical exam. Everybody should be tested and get directed for treatment. And the other is teachers need to be taught on how to identify kids that are showing signs and symptoms of serious mental illnesses. Because when you just punish behavior, and if the underlying behavior is caused from a mental illness, you're going to make it worse. And so if we would do a better job and bring them in earlier and stop waiting for people to grow up into my system and get ahead of the problem, we could prevent a lot of these problems.
That's great advice. Ruth, do you, since the managing entity has 4 counties.
So as I hate to interrupt you.
That's fine.
But I'd really like to say I'm really excited about your answer, because everything that you talked about is something that Pinellas County is doing.
Fabulous.
The program in the schools is called Mental Health First Aid,
Great.
and we're teaching our teachers how to respond to kids with behavioral health problems. We're also teaching folks who just come in contact with people how to manage those interactions better, so that those interactions can be more successful. You know, the collaboration that's happening is amazing. It's the sequential intercept mapping that you're talking about is something that we did back in 2013, I think. And Dr. Engelhardt is a part of this community. And it's been the basis of many research projects and assessments of how we're doing. So you know, in an effort to make the world a better place, which is sort of what we're all about, we've really looked at where are the gaps, where are the overlaps. And certainly we found them. Certainly we found some. The county and the managing entity and the sheriff's office and other funders of behavioral health services have really begun looking at where are the gaps and where are the overlaps and where are the silos. Why is it that you have to go to jail to get to treatment? Why can't we do that without going to jail? How can folks who are in jail access services that are in the community? And how can we make sure that folks can get from one service provider to the next without falling through some crack that we didn't even know was really there? So all of that work is beginning to take place, and we're beginning to see lots of, as one of my directors likes to say, lots of return on investment with that. Lots of people who are beginning to make those connections, and there are warm handoffs that are happening. So,
thank you.
Just to kind of let you know what we're doing here in Pinellas.
Great. Dr. East, do you have anything to add? Okay, great. So this would be to all of you. What do you think is the best way to invest resources into fighting addiction and community mental health issues? And do we do it separately or do we do it combined? I know what my opinion is, but I really want to hear yours.
I think honestly that we need to do it combined, and if one overlaps the other one, then we can, provide more exclusive services. We have things called co-occurring disorders, which are disorders that include a mental health and a substance abuse disorder at the same time, and we don't know which one came first, the chicken or the egg, right? Are they drinking a substance in order to deal with their depression, or did their depression cause them to drink? And because we don't know that, we need to do kind of a circular, roundabout 360 approach to that. But I also want to piggyback on the mental health first aid. As a trainer myself in mental health first aid, I do understand the importance of that training, but I also understand that we need diversity training as well to go along with that, because that is one of the things that we are missing specifically from our environments, especially for our educators. Our educators, our law enforcement are very well vamped on CIT training and mental health first aid, which is wonderful, but we also need to educate them on LGBTQ. We also need to educate them on how to deal with diversity with the children in their population. If you have a child that comes from a socioeconomic, poor situation, and they're coming into your classroom, they may not have the focus that they need that day to be successful in that classroom. They might have spent that evening just surviving, or they might have spent that evening working with mom and dad, or taking care of their siblings, or what have you. And so they may not have the wherewithal. So they are constantly being misdiagnosed with conduct disorder and oppositional defiance disorder, and of course ADHD, and placing all these labels. So I do feel like that needs to happen. Another approach that I think needs to happen is alternatives to psychotropic medications. I feel that some individuals are a little bit script happy. And because of some of the kickbacks that pharmaceutical companies do provide, it is quite easy to kind of fall in that particular loop. But we have alternatives such as meditation, yoga, different type of alternative herbal remedies such as kava root for anxiety. These things have all been proven, especially yoga and meditation, to help children who are seriously diagnosed with ADHD disorders and things of that nature be able to focus and control, their modalities and their behaviors. And so I do feel like that is the place where we need to be dumping our monies.
So I'm an old addictions therapist from way back in the 80s, back when the 12 steps were popular. Everybody was doing it. And way back then we thought, if a person has an addiction and a mental health problem, you have to treat the addiction first. Otherwise, you'll never get to the mental health problem. And there are folks on the other side who thought, if you don't deal with the underlying problem, they're never going to stop drinking. What we know now, after years of research and lots of studying, is that Dr. Butler's right.
Dr. East.
I'm sorry, Dr. East is right. I'm sorry.
That's okay. She's awesome. That works.
Dr. Butler is nice. Hi. It's funny when you see somebody and okay, sorry. So Dr. East is right. It is something that we need to treat together. We need to do state-of-the-art treatment. We don't need to buy into all of the wives' tales and it doesn't work because it didn't work that way for me. We really need to look at what's most evidence informed, and what do people respond to, and how can we make those connections? You know, it's really hard these days to decide if a person should be held under the Baker Act or if the person should be held under the Marchman Act. And those are the different laws that can restrain a person based on their mental health or their substance use. Detain a person based on their mental health or their substance use. It's many times difficult to tell which one is appropriate because we don't know which came first. We don't know which one is the problem right now. Many drugs have very similar effects to mental health, acute mental health problems. So it's really difficult to tell, and we rely on police officers to try to make those decisions. We need to address both at the same time.
Okay. Judge, anything on resources? And it was the best way to invest resources.
You know, I think they covered it well.
Okay, great.
You know, we got to just pull our dollars together and use them properly.
So how many of you in the room don't know what a Marchman Act? You've never heard of a Marchman Act? That's what I thought. So how many of you don't know what a Baker Act is? One. Okay. So, Judge, well, I'm going to do it in simple terms.
Sure.
Rather. So a Baker Act, and if I'm wrong, correct me, but a Baker Act is if you are a danger to yourself or someone else because of your mental illness, you can be involuntarily committed for up to 72 hours. A Marchman Act is the same thing, only if you're a danger to yourself or someone else because of your addiction, you can be involuntarily committed for up to 3 days. And a judge can lengthen that or shorten that. So Pinellas County doesn't know much about a Marchman Act because we didn't have a Marchman facility until recently. And so I think maybe you might hear that a little bit more now because we have something like that. Before, a Marchman Act went to jail, and we just don't feel that the jail is the appropriate place for someone who's needing to be involuntarily committed because of their addiction. So, Judge Leifman, these are for you. Since we now clarified what a Baker Act is, and you didn't tell me I got it wrong, are there plans to modernize the Baker Act? Because there's many people that have been Baker Acted and don't feel it's an effective emergency room kind of thing. So tell me, am I wrong? Are they wrong? Is there any movement to change the Baker Act?
So as the commissioner said, the Baker Act is an involuntary commitment for people that are showing signs and symptoms of serious mental illness that may be imminently dangerous to themselves or others, or through self-neglect, their neglect is so bad it's putting their own life in peril. Florida is a minority state. We have an extraordinarily high criteria, meaning it's very difficult to get somebody Baker Acted, as we would say, more so than most states. I think we're one of about 4 states that have this very, very high criteria. So for instance, in Florida, in order to meet criteria, you have to be imminently dangerous to self or others based on some type of bodily harm. So if you're threatening to actually hurt somebody badly, you can be Baker Acted. If you, however, destroy your house in a psychotic episode, that is not going to be sufficient to get you involuntarily committed. And so there are movements afoot to try to modernize Florida's Baker Act, to make it more middle of the road, to make it more consistent with what most states are doing, so that it's not impossible to get people treated that need treatment. Like anything, I will tell you, because I probably see more people with serious mental illnesses in a day than most psychiatrists see in a month. The best way is to talk to people respectfully, try to encourage them to be part of their own treatment. And when you get people to voluntarily do that, they have better outcomes. I think as a last resort, though, for people that are at a level where their brain is burning up and there may be permanent damage going on and they lack the insight to that illness, there may have to be an intervention by the court and by a provider to help that person get treated involuntarily. And so the key is to try to set it up in a way that works best for the individual and actually helps them get into a system of recovery. But to allow people to be floridly psychotic, recycling through homelessness, substance abuse, putting themselves at dangers by living out on the streets, to me just is not an appropriate manner of care. And so there's a major initiative this year to try to modernize Florida's Baker Act to make us more consistent with the other states.
So I have a
And
list.
I would say,
Go ahead.
we also have something called assisted outpatient treatment in Florida, which is only used by 1 or 2 counties. I think Seminole County, I'm not sure, 1 or 2 others. The legislature 2 years ago allowed the criminal courts in the misdemeanor divisions to use something called assisted outpatient treatment. And this is for people that are like kind of those 97, those really high utilizers that are homeless, recycling. And it gives us more leverage to encourage those individuals to take treatment. And I will tell you, we're doing it in Miami-Dade for about 6 months now. It's miraculous to watch people come back. And it is the greatest thing you will ever see, that people get insight into their illness, they want to get better again, and they don't want to be out on the street. But it's a very onerous process under the law. So part of the suggestion under this new bill that we're promoting would be to put the assisted outpatient treatment law with the Baker Act and just give the court the option to use whatever they thought was appropriate based on the law, so you don't have to go through 2 different legal processes to get someone under the assisted outpatient treatment. And also, part of the proposed legislation would help streamline the Marchman Act. The Marchman Act is also very difficult for family members to use. And so under some of the proposals that we're recommending, it would make it easier to file those petitions.
I'm really glad you did the "and," because the second half of that was really critically important. Because if we do that outpatient treatment, I think it would really make a big difference. So, and the Marchman Act, streamlining that, I think would be much more effective once families know that they have a tool that they can use as a resource to help their loved one. I think that's great, and I'll help lobby for you to make sure that the legislature passes it. So I have like 10 or 12 more questions, but I'd rather engage the audience. So I think we have a microphone, if we do, and I would love to have questions from you all, or I can keep going, but my intuition tells me you all have some questions. So I've got a gentleman here with a microphone. If you want to raise your hand.
Hello, everyone. My name is Michael Ballard. Wait, can you hear that? Are we good?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Hello, everyone. My name is Michael Ballard. I was born in California, but I moved here 3 years ago. For me, mental issues is more than just normally looking at someone. I myself have Asperger's, and my father has them as well. My mother, no, but she has worked with people who have mental issues. For me, I think that we need to focus more on education and or helping people. I went to Seminole High School around 3 years ago, and from what I noticed, they did not have very good mental issues. Normally they tell you to go to the therapist, and when you do, the door's locked, but the light's on, and you normally hear people talking in there, or one time they're just on their phones doing whatever. Normally watching TV, just enjoying, and they would do that for 8 hours a day. They would only be available 2 to 3 days a week for 2 to 3 hours. From what I also heard, and this is for the special education room, they had bet fighting areas where people would fight for money, sometimes $5 to $20 just for fun. They would have kids make swords with saws and pipes and whatever, and these were kids who had schizophrenia, Asperger's, kids who should not have access to sharp tools without safety. They had students looking after special needs people with no training. Even from me, I asked, and I had some issues because people were bullying me, i.e. throwing food, threatening to kill me, doing whatever, and when I went to them, they said, oh, it's not you, it's your disability, and your disability is a disease. It cannot be solved, it's just a hindrance on your life. And that was from someone who had training in special needs and was trained to work with people, and this was a professional teacher from Seminole and from Pinellas County. Ever since then, I wanted to help people and just give them training, but I feel like that we need to focus more on the teachers as well as not only helping give them access, but make a program where we can help give them more pay and therefore attract people who have more experience in dealing with people who need access to help.
Thank you.
I was wondering, what do you think should be done? Or
So the question was, what do you all think should be done?
Being in the educational institution myself, first of all, thank you so much for being so brave and so strong, for standing up and telling your story. I really appreciate that, and I'm humbled by that experience. But I want to focus on the question that you said is what can we do? I totally agree with you. Yes, it's great for us to have a level of training, but we need to have ongoing education for individuals that are in any institutions, whether it's police officers, educators, youth workers at community centers, all daycare workers, all these individuals need trainings. I think the problem that we often get pushback on is time, right? Having the time to attend these trainings. Why not make them virtual? We're already on our phones anyway. Right? So my thing is with SPC, what we're trying to do is not only are we providing a face-to-face training for all of our faculty and staff, we're also providing monthly 15-minute virtual trainings for them as well, so that they have those pick-me-ups. They're steadily getting more information. Things like mental health first aid are great starting points because they focus and collaborate all the major mental health key components that we have. But what we also need to do is break those down on either a quarterly or bi-monthly basis to where that faculty and staff are able to come back and just focus on that one specific area, such as children with special needs or diversity or poor socioeconomic status, as well as our mental health in other areas. Another piece that I think is important is saturation. I think this is the key as to why we are not getting the awareness that we need because we don't saturate. I'll give you a quick example. I was on Facebook, of course, the past couple of mornings, and I did some research when I typed in Breast Cancer Awareness Month, because October is Breast Cancer Awareness Month, and I found 336 people had actually posted about breast cancer awareness. Great, right? Guess what? It's also Domestic Violence Awareness Month. And I found 86 people had posted about domestic violence awareness. So that helps you to understand the differential between some of our other issues that we're dealing with that are involving mental health and the medical issues that are so brightly turned out. We have to use our social media platforms such as Facebook, blogging, Instagram, and all those particular areas to spread that saturation. The more we make it a very casual topic of conversation and acceptance, the more frequently people will feel more comfortable with accepting their own diagnosis, but also seeking out help and helping others get to the help that they need as well.
Any additionals, or should I go to the next question? Great. Next question. The gentleman with the microphone. Or Ashley, if you've got it. He's right in the middle right here.
We
okay.
have one up front.
Up front. Oh, okay.
Turned off.
I'd like to thank all of you for coming up. My name is Brett. This is a little complicated. It's been said that you can judge a society by the way it treats its prisoners. We saw how prisoners are treated, not very nice. I see a general consensus that addiction and mental health are the same, are one and the same, or at least they're very close cousins. I feel that. You believe that there's a stigma attached to addictions? Mm-hmm. I'm a recovering alcoholic, drug addict. I've been sober for years and years. I'm a graduate of this school. I graduated cum laude. I'm currently in a master's program with a 4.0. Yeah. And when hold on. That's great, but trying to find a job, and I'm trying to go into public service because I graduated with a public policy degree. Have you ever been convicted of a? Yes, I have. I have a felony drug conviction that is a stigma on me from when President George H.W. Bush was in office. And it doesn't go away, and it's a stigma that's attached to me. Thank you.
I think Commissioner Peters, you can probably talk more about that. You did lots of work around arrest records and working with peers and.
I did, but I'm not your panelist. I'm just your moderator. So I'd rather pass that one off to the judge because he's going to handle that a lot better.
Well, thank you for discussing your issue, and that's why it's so important that we do our best to decriminalize these issues so that we don't take an entire section of our society and make it impossible or difficult for them to be contributing members. I mean, if you look at neuroscience, what helps people recover is being able to do things they love to do. And if we limit that ability, we're going to make it difficult for them to stay in recovery and have full and lives that are contributing to society. So it is difficult. I think we're turning that corner. I find it fascinating that you have the Koch brothers and the ACLU on the exact same page on something called Smart Justice. And there is a major initiative nationally to reform our laws. And Florida's starting to do that as well. And so I think we're moving in the right direction. But you raise a different point. We're kind of forgetting the people that are getting left behind from the old laws. And so maybe there needs to be some consideration. How do we go back and after a certain period of time maybe allow people to expunge these records so that they can move on?
This happened in Pennsylvania. I went there and they said because it's a staggered sentence, the second offense carries a deeper sentence.
And if you're adjudicated in Florida, see if they withhold the adjudication in Florida, you can get it removed. But once you're adjudicated, which happens on a second offense, it's there permanently. So maybe there does need to be some consideration, and maybe we should have that conversation. How do we help people that got caught up from the 80s on?
Yeah, I think
and
that's a
find a way. Okay, thank you.
I think that's a great conversation to have, and it affects so many people that it's absolutely critical. Sir, what I do want to tell you in Pinellas County, not only does every police department have a significant amount of officers trained in CIT, the Sheriff's Department sends licensed mental health counselors in their squad cars when they go on a mental health call. So that we can slow down the criminalization. And by opening up Marchment beds, that's another way in which if we do a Marchment Act, then we're not arresting them on drug charges. And so I think once we get that kind of moving and going, that way we're not criminalizing for the mental illness or for the addiction. And Pinellas County is working on doing that so that we prevent that from ever happening. I know that doesn't help the history, but at least we're going to hopefully prevent that from happening to people in the future. So another question, there were a ton of hands.
One real quick follow-up on
Yeah.
that. Several years ago, Florida started to do some great initiatives for peers, and they set up training and certification. And then the very next year, they passed legislation that said if you had a criminal record, you couldn't work in any state-related job, and all the peers that had just been hired all got fired. I have 8 peers that, the courts are exempt from that. So I have 8 peers that work in our program in Miami-Dade County, and they all have criminal records. And I will tell you, they are the secret recipe of my success, because they are able to break through to people and incentivize them to want to get better. And so I agree with you, and I've seen it firsthand how effective our peers are, and we just need to be smarter and have a different assessment on who and who shouldn't work in these systems.
So in Pinellas County, we don't have peers in our judicial system, but we do have a peer here that works with our police. If you can stand up, please stand up. She does incredible work, and she is a peer, and she works with people with mental illness, and she's doing an awesome job. So thank you so much for what you do. Okay, next question. You know what, I've only got like 7 minutes left, so if we could kind of do the short answers so we can get more questions in would be really great. It's a great topic, so I got 2 microphones out there. Pick someone.
So especially since you said that it's first identified for younger generation, 14 to 25, I'm a firm believer in kids helping kids. I'm a Girl Scout leader. I've had as many as 40 girls in my troop at one point in time. My daughter's currently 16, working on her Gold Award. And for those of you who don't know what a Girl Scout Gold Award is, it's a very big deal. It's the equivalent to a Boy Scout, Eagle Scout. But she's wanting to do something in relation to teen suicide. So from a peer-to-peer, what are some thoughts that you guys might have of kids helping kids in the mental health world?
I'm going to leave that to the expert mental health folks.
I think that's an excellent idea. If you look at certain organizations like NAMI on campus, where they provide mental health awareness strategies for students on campus and allow students to lead those groups, where students have to actually collaborate with other students on that. It's a lot easier to look across the room and see someone that looks like you and be able to relate and also expose yourself to that information. And so I believe that that is something that definitely needs to happen on our school base. I think that what we probably should do is get some of these organizations involved to help spearhead that approach so that we can make sure it's safe, you know, for our students to definitely talk about that in case other issues arise in those particular areas. Another thing I would recommend for your daughter as well is for her to get in contact with some of these private practitioners that are in our community that are providing, you know, internships and awareness and education, which will kind of give her a firsthand, you know, foot in the door to help her kind of understand the process of intake and, you know, assessing, and also the process of having an open posture and a very welcoming, you know, presence. And I think that'll be helpful for her as well as she continues.
And you can get some agencies right in the gallery over here that have tables, and you can talk to every one of them, and they can, and NAMI's there, and they can make recommendations closer to where you live so it's convenient for her.
I'd also recommend you Googling a program called HIP, H-I-P, Health Information Project, and I don't want to sound like a broken record, we're doing in Miami. It's only because we have more problems. It's not that we're better, trust me. And this is an amazing peer-to-peer program. It's in every public school in Dade County. And teachers recommend kids that are in 11th and 12th grade. They're then trained in all the primary health-related, gun-related issues, and mental health issues. And then those peers go into every 9th grade class in Dade County schools. And they set up a peer-to-peer program, and they talk about these important issues, whether it's issues involving, gay and lesbian kids and the struggles they're having with depression, or domestic abuse may be going on at home. And the kids then put them in touch with counselors at the school to make sure that they get what they needed. And it is amazing. And they're trying to replicate it statewide. And I think it's one of the best things we've done, and the peer programs work really well.
Okay, so I'm gonna make a commitment to run late, and I'm gonna take your question as the last question. Okay, sir?
Thank you very much. My name is Joshua Staton. I am a bachelor's of public policy and administration here at St. Pete College. I'm very nervous because the question I'm about to ask is it just has me shaking. The question is this. We're talking about everyone that has mental illness, but we're not actually talking, and the reason that came to my mind is because Dr. East said, that it's not just about the client or the patient, also for the staff members, those who are helping them, to look at themselves. The question is this. We've got issues with certain judges and prosecutors, people that are in power that can actually put people behind bars for life. And they actually, there's some situations out there where they themselves have mental health issues and or drug addiction. So we have some evidence, lots of evidence. I'm not going to get into details, but we have one gentleman who he was a medical doctor, a pediatrician in Connecticut, and he lost his license for cocaine addiction. He comes to Florida, and we have evidence, he now is basically he's the chief of the division of addiction medicine at UF Shands Hospital. And I've got patients of his that are afraid to come out, doctors who have drug addiction and mental health issues that have come to me and said, listen, I was there looking for help, and this doctor, the chief, Marchman acted me and didn't even evaluate me first. And I said, well, I asked a little bit more questions, and they said when I was in his private office, a couple people mentioned to me that he said, I am God and I'll do what I want. So we've got people that are in power that can control other lives, that are actually drug addicts themselves or had mental issues themselves, and now they're in positions where they can control other lives, and they're actually Marchman acting innocent doctors, certain doctors that could be innocent and or just are looking for help, but they're Marchman acting them without first evaluating them properly. So what are we doing about those that are in power that can actually control our lives, like your judges, your prosecutors, like your chief directors at hospitals like UF Shands? What about that?
So I think that we have bad actors everywhere. And I think that when professionals act outside their licenses and act outside their code of ethics, that they need to be reported and they need to be investigated. And we don't need to make excuses for them.
And I will say the Florida Supreme Court has been extraordinarily involved in this issue, and starting, I would say, 7 years ago, all new judges are required to take about 6 hours of training, and 3 and 3 and 2 sessions in the first 2 weeks of what we call Baby Judge College on mental health and substance abuse issues. And they now have, what I didn't have when I started, was the ability to learn how to identify these cases, how to appropriately deal with these cases, and make sure that we're getting the right kinds of outcomes. We're also working to scale a lot of the best practices in Sarasota, Fort Myers, and other areas that are going on so that we can get it throughout the state. And we have a very intensive judicial education program in Florida, and we're really doing, I think, a pretty decent job of making sure our judges are trained. But there is a judicial qualifying commission that if somebody steps out and they're not doing what needs to be, you can always file a complaint.
Yep.
Okay, I want to thank you all. I know there's so many more questions, and some of our panelists may be willing to stay back and answer some questions individually if you'd like to do that. I want to recognize the chair of the Institute of Strategic Policy Solutions, Judge Irene Sullivan, is in the audience here.
Judge Sullivan.
Judge Sullivan, when she was on the bench, did amazing things for children, and it's such a privilege to be on the board with you, and thank you for attending. Great, I'm glad you liked it. I also want to thank our participants. Judge Steve Leifman, you're just such a joy and a pleasure, and he's such a great knowledge. I just love listening to him, and I've heard his speech over and over again, and I always get something else out of it. So thank you, sir, for being here. Ruth Powers, I work with Ruth on a regular basis in the county. My mission is to come up with a permanent solution and a coordinated system of care, and using all of our providers to work together, and she's really one of the facilitators that helps us do that. Also, the county staff that are still here, Lourdes, I know, and your staff are still here from the county. They're working really, really hard, and I'm really confident that the county is going to have the right funding and the right plan to make a difference in this county. And then Dr. East, also, I want to thank you for everything you're doing at the college, ensuring that all the students here at the college have access to mental health. Your program HEAL is really wonderful, and I'm so glad that you're facilitating that program for all the students here. And so be sure to spread the word about that program if you're a student here, and make sure people know we have to break the stigma so people aren't afraid to get help. Also, to wrap up, I want to remind you again that the gallery is right around the corner. There's people there that are experts in this field, and they'd love to answer questions for you and direct you where you could go for help. Also, I really want to thank all of you that took the time to come here, and all of you that decided to take the time to stream and look on your computer and watch this program. I think it's just, we have to keep talking about it. We're never going to make a difference if we don't stop talking. We have to keep talking about it. And that way we can eliminate the stigma. I want to remind you about the next Institute program, which is a dinner event at the Seminole Campus Conference Center. The topic is artificial intelligence. Is it good or evil? The feature speaker is Dr. Alex Beavers, who is the Chief Innovation Officer at Mote Marine Institute. And joining him for the conversation will be the St. Petersburg College faculty member, Chad Marin, who is the creator of the Innovation Lab on the Seminole campus. So please visit the website to find out more and register, solutions.spcollege.edu. For our students in the audience, please look for the Great Debate preliminary competitions at your campus. And for all those interested in civic engagement, SPC is hosting the Florida Civic Advanced Summit on December 12th and 13th, so please look that up. And again, thank you for attending, and I wish you all a wonderful, safe evening.
Commissioner Peters, I have one more ask.
One more ask.
I'd like for you all to take out your cell phones. I know you have them. I got this idea from a friend of mine who's here in the audience, who's chairing the Zero Suicide movement. So everybody get out your cell phones, and I want you to put in this phone number, and save this phone number, 1-800-273-8255. That's the National Suicide Hotline. Please pass it on.
Please pass it on. St. Petersburg, or Pinellas County, is one of the highest suicide rates in the country, so definitely in the state. So thank you. Pass that on. Oh, and it's up there, so great.
That's nice.
Thank you so much, and have a wonderful evening. And if our guests want to stay and answer questions, that would be wonderful. If not, please drive safe home. Thank you. Oh, and the booklets. Thank you. Nami just reminded me. They're going to hand out these booklets as you walk out the door. Please make sure you get one. There's really, really, really great information in here. Thank you so much.
It's been really nice to meet you.
Same here.